Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Food Processing Skills Canada's Speaking Food webinar series. My name is Tracy Bernacchi-Duza, and I am the Senior Project Manager at FPSC. I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Laura Fair. Laura Fair is a workplace accessibility and neurodiversity consultant with 10 plus years of experience in recruiting, coaching, training, and HR consulting across Canada and internationally. She helps organizations, especially in the food and beverage sector, build inclusive environments that attract, support, and retain diverse talent. She holds a BBA in employment relations from Acadia University and an MSc in business and coaching psychology from Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, the UK. A trauma-informed ADHD specialist coach, Laura also volunteers as a sprint kayaking coach with Special Olympics athletes, extending her passion for inclusion beyond the workplace. A dynamic speaker and facilitator, Laura is known for her practical, down-to-earth style. She creates welcoming spaces that blend evidence-based insights with real-world application, sparking dialogue, curiosity, and hands-on learning that drives lasting impact. Please welcome Laura Fair.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, just type in the Q&A at any point and we'll get to it at the end. We'll save at least 10 minutes for questions at the end, but I will just share my screen and we'll get started because it's a big topic today. Can you all see? Let me make sure.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, great, because it's just shown up as the Zoom page for me. So as long as you can be. My company is Abound. I really believe that every individual deserves the opportunity to thrive at work. A lot of the work I do is specializing in neurodiversity in the workplace, mental wellness, and accessibility. So really helping organizations create environments where everyone has to be successful. We already went over some participant engagements. Please just mute your mics unless you're asking a question. It's 60 minutes. I find it hard to sit down for a long time. So if you need to get up and move around, please do so. Try your best to be present. I know sometimes it's tempting to answer emails in the background. Of course, if there's anything urgent, feel free to do so. But just try your best to be present in the room and engage how you feel most comfortable. We'll have some time for questions at the end, like I said. Really, the purpose of this session is to increase our and disability and how it relates. We're going to build awareness of the benefits, as well as identify divergent individuals and people who experience disability. If you're not familiar with the term neurodivergent, don't worry, I'm going to go over that. I know not everyone's familiar with the term. We're also going to learn some strategies on how to create environments where everyone has opportunity to succeed. Just a very quick overview. You know, we only have 50 minutes to go over this, and it's a very broad topic in a very broad sector. So this is really, like I said, to increase our awareness and understanding. We're going to talk about strengths and challenges, identify barriers, and talk about strategies for success. A bit about me. You already had the intro, so I won't spend too much time, but you know, I really approached my own experience with diagnosed ADHD and PTSD. So I really approached this from, you know, lived experience, from my own lived experience, but also working with athletes with different abilities and leaders and individuals in the workplace with different abilities. I'm really just fascinated about people, all aspects of people, and you know, processes and business. So the work that I do is really a great blend of everything that I'm interested in. Like I said, you know, I have that lived experience, but a lot of my education and background focuses on really people in the workplace. You know, I have that blend of HR, psychology, sociology background. I'm also a trained ADHD coach. I love to learn, so I always, look to get more certifications. But yeah, that's a bit about my education. My background started as a recruiting consultant, so I've done recruiting for local organizations, national organizations, international organizations. It's really brought a great perspective in terms of learning about the realities in the workplace. Being a consultant, I've built my career on asking questions and kind of being that outsider. People are typically a little bit more honest with me. So I've worked across so many different industries, across so many different organizations. A lot of the work that I do now is within leadership development, strategic planning, coaching, training, and specifically with Abound. Like I said, a lot of my work focuses on neurodiversity, accessibility, and mental wellness in the workplace. Give a brief overview. I know a lot of people use some of this language interchangeably, and there's certainly a relationship, but I like to go over kind of the differences and just get very clear foundation. I know this isn't new for a lot of people, but when we talk about diversity, we're talking about the people in the room and all of our differences. We're talking about the population and everything that makes us different. When we talk about diversity, it's about representation. Equity makes sure that people have what they need to thrive. So it's different from equality in the sense of if everyone on this call needed glasses, equality would be giving everyone the same prescription, where equity is making sure that everyone, has the specific prescription that they need to see clearly, right? So that's the difference between equity and equality. When we talk about accessibility, it's similar to equity, but it's really talking about removing the barriers so that everyone can participate fully. And inclusion ensures diverse voices are engaged. So really actually hearing from diverse voices, not just, inviting them to the meeting or, kind of performative inclusion, which happens a lot. There's a quote that says, diversity is about inviting someone to the dance. Inclusion is about, inviting that person to actually dance. I think belonging is actually having a good time at that dance. So belonging is feeling that when inclusion is working, right? So do you feel psychologically safe? Do you feel like you can be yourself? Do you feel like your voice is valued? Do you feel like you belong? So that's just a little bit of the differences between, some of the language. When we talk about concept that's either familiar or unfamiliar to the people within the call, neurodiversity is the concept that all in terms of neurocognitive ability. So everyone has both talents, things they struggle with, however, variation between those strengths and challenges more bring advantage, but can also be disabling. This is a quote from an organization in the UK called Genius Within. It was founded by Nancy Doyle. If you are interested on doing more research on neurodiversity in the workplace, I'd really recommend Nancy Doyle. Her work is really credible, someone that I've researched a lot through my dissertation. And it's someone who's really passionate about making positive change in the workplace. So essentially, everyone on this call, we're all neurodiverse. We all learn, think, process, and behave differently. That's not to say that everyone is neurodivergent, okay? So neurodivergent, I used this term before. It might not be familiar to everyone. And you may have lived experience. You might be a caregiver of someone who's neurodivergent. But just to make sure everyone's clear on what it means, it really refers to the individual. So the individual may have neurological development functioning that differs from what society dictates as normal. And I'm putting normal in air quotes there. It's not a diagnosis. It's a non-medical umbrella term. Some people identify with this term because it doesn't use language such as the medical lens, which is typically associated with deficits, disorder, disability. So some people may or may not identify with the term, but like I said, it's not a diagnosis. It includes anything from intellectual disabilities, neurodevelopmental differences, mental health differences, acquired brain injury. It's a really broad umbrella term. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the conditions that fall under the umbrella. But again, when we refer to neurodiversity, it's the population. We're all neurodiverse. Not everyone is considered neurodivergent. So this refers to the individual. It's an identity term. Sometimes people use the term neurodiverse to talk about an individual. For something to be diverse, we need multiple of, right? So you wouldn't call an individual neurodiverse. An individual is neurodivergent. We are all neurodiverse because we all learn, think, process, behave differently. Like I said, the umbrella is very broad. If you were to do kind of general research on the topic online, you would typically only hear about ADHD, autism, dyslexia, maybe Tourette's. But I think it's important to talk about the diversity within neurodiversity because it's very broad, right? And we want to normalize this. And unfortunately, some of these labels have more stigma attached than others. I know for myself, I'm very open about talking with, about my ADHD. There's more stigma attached to PTSD, and I'm not as comfortable talking about it with people that I don't know. I've had people disclose in my sessions before that they've just been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and they're very fearful of disclosing it because of the lack of awareness around it, or fear of discrimination or losing their job. And I just like to say this just because there's so many people within the workplace who maybe have bipolar or BPD or struggle with depression or anxiety, and they're very fearful of talking about it because of that lack of awareness and stigma attached to it. So if we're talking about neurodiversity, let's make sure we're including the whole umbrella of neurodiversity. I like to use the biopsychosocial model of disability. It may or may not be familiar to some. I know a lot of people talk about the social model of disability, but the BPS models, it's a framework that looks at disability as a result of the interaction between three different factors rather than just the individual, right? So we can break it down to maybe biological differences, individual differences. This could be health conditions. Maybe someone lives with chronic illness or impairments. That could be our neurological differences, such as autism or ADHD, maybe acquired brain injury. So this is more about the individual. But there's also psychological aspects of it. So our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, coping strategies, personal beliefs. Someone that I was coaching felt like the only reason why they felt like they had a disability in the workplace is because they were fearful of disclosing to their manager. They had a lack of psychological safety. That was really the only thing that was holding them back from thriving in the workplace. There's also, the social aspect. So our environmental and cultural context, our built environments, talking about accessibility, our policies, these are more systemic barriers, right? So it takes away from the mindset that the individual has a disability. They're very limited because of that. Oftentimes, if we make changes to the task, our environment, our culture, if we're getting medication or sleeping or eating right, these things don't have to be so disabling, right? Sometimes it's very just situational. Sometimes it's temporary. Sometimes it's permanent. But I like to nuance disability a little bit. And we think about kind of the individual aspects. I really don't like to associate certain things with certain labels because I think that could be quite limiting. Everyone has completely different experiences. But if we think about some of these differences, it could be differences in how we learn. So how we absorb, organize, and express our knowledge. So we all have different learning preferences. For myself, I need to learn by doing. I'm not really someone who thrives in environments where I'm getting verbal directions because I have auditory processing challenges. So it kind of sounds like the teacher in Charlie Brown when I'm getting instructions. It's like, womp, 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 womp. I really need to learn by doing, kind of getting in there, trial and error. I really have challenges with reading as well. So think about if you are onboarding a new employee, are you giving them just a bunch of written documents or large PDFs? Maybe it's instructions on how to set up your computers or IT equipment. That might be a real challenge for some people. Maybe you need to have videos or have someone walk them through it, kind of that body doubling. Thinking, we all have different cognitive processing, memory, focus. Executive functioning is something that we all have. It's our essentially brain's management system, everything that helps us prioritize, organize, time management. And there's a lot of variability within executive functioning in terms of strengths and abilities. For someone like myself, I really struggle with memory. I need a lot of visual reminders. So if you saw my calendar, I literally set reminders every day. Okay, go to the gym, go for a walk. You would be surprised at how many reminders I have in my phone, but I really need that visual cue, right? Feeling. This is kind of a form of, it's associated with our executive functioning. So our ability to emotionally regulate. Again, it's completely different for everyone. It's very fluid. Sometimes it depends on the day, how much sleep you had. For some people, it's a challenge every day, and there's a lot of variability. So this could be mood variability. For some people, maybe they experience depression and mania, or sometimes it's, just longer times of experienced depression, and that's a challenge in itself, right? Emotional reactivity. I coach a lot of athletes who struggle with impulse control, and we're kayaking all day, and sometimes their impulse is to tip their boats. That's some of the challenges we have. So kind of being able to regulate and manage that feeling of impulse, as well as emotional expression, how we're able to express ourselves in a constructive and effective way. These are all things that are completely different for everyone. Behaving, so how people express their energy, their emotions, their social interaction patterns. For some people, they might have preferences for communication. So in the workplace, I know a lot of times from neurodivergent individuals, they have that fear that they're constantly going to be in trouble. So if you were to set a meeting with someone, it's helpful to explain why you want to have the meeting, maybe set a little bit of an agenda beforehand. So it can kind of calm some of that feeling of anxiety rather than meet me at 4 p.m. I want to talk about something, right? So just kind of that preferences of how you would like to either receive feedback or communicate in the workplace. Processing. This has to do with, how we interpret our sensory environment. So either verbal or nonverbal information. This can have to do with light, noise, smells. For myself, I have a lot of sensory sensitivities around light and noise. That probably comes from playing years of rugby and getting a lot of undiagnosed concussions, but also my ADHD and PTSD. The feeling of, overwhelm that can come from either busy rooms or loud noises, bright lights, or something that really give me a migraine. So when I'm working, I can have challenges in the workplace where it's an open concept environment with really bright lights and white walls. When I work from home, I love it because I have control over my environment. And when we talk about accommodations in the workplace, sometimes it just needs to be a very simple, informal adjustment, right? It could be as simple as dimming the lights and, allowing someone to work with noise canceling headphones, for example. Adjustments and accommodations don't always have to be so formal. Regulating, we talked about this, so our ability to manage impulse, emotions, our attention. This is something I struggle with ADHD for sure. So being able to manage frustration, emotional control, task initiation is something that I hear a lot about from my ADHD clients. This has to do with just getting started. Sometimes it's very daunting. It just feels like it takes so much effort just to get started. And a lot of times, neurodivergent individuals were wired for interest rather than importance. So I like to say that I like sprinkle dopamine over tasks that are not so interesting for me. Maybe I need to do some administrative work for my company. Maybe that means I'll listen to a podcast or take more frequent breaks, for example. So again, supports and adjustments don't have to be so formal. If you're working with an individual who feels like they're at a heightened state, rather than having a conversation with that individual, they might just need to go for a long walk or maybe a 5-minute walk. Just take some time to kind of regulate before you have that conversation. Pacing and timing, this has to do with processing as well. We all work at different speeds. Some people are more marathoners, some people are more sprinters. I'm a really speedy processor. At times, that means I can make mistakes. I talk too fast for people to understand me. Maybe I'm working at a faster pace than the people on my team and I need to slow down. My partner, so my fiance, is more of a slower processor. So when we're working together on maybe something at our home, I need to understand that we work at different paces and I kind of need to cool myself down a little bit and maybe give him some more time about, expressing his thoughts, right? So that's just an example. Consistency and variability. So sometimes our abilities and behavior, it can really fluctuate. It can really depend on the day. For myself, some days I'm really high energy. Other days I might just feel pretty burnt out, depressed. My tank is really empty. So that means sometimes my performance isn't as consistent, and that can be confusing for someone who's maybe my manager or works for me, being able to kind of navigate that. But that's just the reality of living with, the challenges that I live with sometimes, having mental health challenges. But it's not to say that I'm not an extremely effective individual. Maybe on the days where I have less energy in the tank, I just need to have a little bit more grace and do things at a slower pace. It's not to say that, I have a get out of jail card where, I don't have to do anything, but it's just a little bit more understanding that maybe today I'm not at 100%. Orientation and navigation. This can have to do with navigating space, either in our built environment or our digital environment. I'm someone who has bruises all over my body because I just bang into walls and I'm just not great at orienting myself. I also struggle with kind of digital layouts. So, I'm not someone who's very digitally inclined, as opposed to someone who's maybe a graphic designer, for example. So some of the things we can do are just having more open layouts, having better signage, having accessible assistive technology when we're working with softwares. These are some of the examples. Perception and interpretation. This has to do with kind of understanding social cues, for example, and kind of interpreting nonverbal information. So kind of that reading between the lines. I hear some challenges with that, either from my autistic athletes or people that I coach, struggle with more of that vagueness, I would say, having to read between the lines, not given a lot of expectation, clarity, consistency. That can be a real struggle for some. So I always say, being clear, being consistent. To be clear is to be kind, right? So when we're working with individuals, just not assuming that they know what you're explaining, because maybe you're not being as clear as maybe you think you are. For example, I have to check myself all the time when I'm either, coaching athletes or coaching individuals in the workplace. This is the last page. But it's just to show how how different this can all look. And for some people, maybe they have strengths and challenges in some areas. And for other people, they might have strengths and challenges in more. Okay. So for dexterity, kind of that fine motor control. So working with your hands, for example. So maybe someone in the workplace might have difficulty gripping pens or tools. So someone who might be on an assembly line dealing with product development or opening packages, for example. Maybe they'll have challenges in that environment, but it's not to say there's other areas in the organization where they could thrive. Mobility, so difficulty moving, walking. So maybe someone has challenges with stairs. Maybe they need extra time to move around. Maybe they have difficulty in non-accessible buildings, but if the building is fully accessible, then maybe they don't really have any challenges throughout their day because there's the proper, accessibility put in place. Sensory, again, talked about this, but this can also be, differences in seeing, hearing, and processing stimuli. So maybe people have difficulty reading their screens or PDFs, trouble hearing in noisy environments. They get overwhelmed from crowded spaces. They could be blind or deaf or hear voices. It could be many different things. Speech and language, again, it could be challenges with either understanding speech or producing speech. I definitely have some athletes where they might struggle with their speech, but it doesn't mean they're not highly intelligent individuals, okay? So maybe sometimes people need just a little extra time to express themselves. Maybe they need assistive tech to help them express themselves. Maybe they are nonverbal. So, they have an iPad with assistive tech to help them communicate. It could look like many different things. And the last one, it could be medical or pain related. So chronic health, chronic illness, maybe fatigue and pain. And maybe that's just short term, maybe that's long term, but it's something to keep in mind with people on our team. We just need to be a little bit more mindful and, taking a strengths-based approach rather than a deficits approach. I think a lot of times, we focus on maybe what people can't do rather than what they can do. And I always like to say it's important to embrace the complexity. There's no one size fits all approach. And oftentimes people get it wrong because they try to use a one size fits all approach. And neurodiversity and disabilities, it's very complex. So we're not going to have simple solutions, right? It's important to know that we all have different unique lived experiences. For some people, maybe they've been diagnosed with autism at age 5 and they've had lots of support growing up, and it's something that they've had time to navigate. For a lot of people that I work with, they're in their 70s and they're just getting diagnosed now, and they're, experiencing almost like a lot of learning and unlearning, right? So it depends on our unique wiring, our history, our environment, and our access to support, as well as intersectionality. So keeping in mind, how do other aspects of our identity, so all aspects of our identity, this could be socioeconomic background, age, race, gender identity, all the things that make us who we are, how do these intersect and influence our experience? So keeping in mind that people can have multiple layers of marginalization, and that can amplify some of their barriers. I had a coaching client in the UK say to me, I don't know if I'm getting discriminated against because I'm autistic or because I'm Black. So that was a conversation we had, and that was her lived experience, right? Co-occurrence. It's also very common to have co-occurring neurodivergence or experiencing disability. This can intensify our challenges, but it can also come with pronounced strengths. I think living with disability or experiencing disability, I think it makes you inherently because you're constantly having barriers in a society that honestly isn't set up for everyone to be successful. So being able to understand the complexity can help us tailor more effective solutions. If everyone on this call had ADHD, we'd all present completely differently. So taking away from that one size fits all approach, taking more of an individualized approach, working with an individual on your team or even yourself, and just understanding where are my strengths, where are my challenges, and what barriers am I facing, and how can I remove some of these barriers for either myself or the people on my team. I mentioned this before, so it could be permanent, temporary, episodic. So maybe as a leader, if there's leaders on this team, how can I be responsive to fluctuating needs? Maybe I'm not a leader and I have to self-advocate myself. And, for myself, having awareness of my fluctuation, hopefully get what I need to be successful. In terms of when we're thinking about the food and bev sector, consider the impact it has. So like I said, this is a very broad sector. There's so many different roles within the sector. Disability and neurodivergence workers to CEOs of organizations, right? So what's the impact that it could have on production and operations, research, quality and product development, safety and compliance, management and support operations, business and specialty roles, right? So if we think about the employee life cycle, for example, where are the barriers within our hiring? So if we break down all the interactions that an individual has throughout the hiring process, whether it's our job ad, emailing someone to set up a phone screen, the phone screens themselves, the interviews, offering someone the job, handing it off to onboarding, identifying barriers within that stage, right? Super important, because maybe, like I said, for onboarding, we're just handing someone 10 different documents and it can be extremely overwhelming. Maybe someone struggles with reading comprehension, so someone isn't able to use the screen reader. Tracy talking about individuals on the production line. And I've had some others say that having people who are, it's because in the warehouses or on the production lines, it's extremely noisy, right? So just to be able, but also the benefit of having people, right? So if we think about product development, well, see things differently, create more effective solutions. So like I said, I don't like have general, but if we think impacts within these roles on how we hire, train, manage people, have performance management conversations, having coaching conversations, are we offering mentorship? If we break down every little stage, oftentimes we could, or maybe such a minute micro barriers. If someone is experiencing micro barriers at every stage of the employee life cycle, right? So think about it's how to compensate, navigate environments that are not set up for you to succeed, which can lead to burnout, can lead to simple adjustments and very that the workplace, so disabling at times. I like to take a next-based approach, and I don't like to associate certain strengths with certain labels. I think that could be limiting as well. I coach a lot of autistic individuals who are extreme social, creative, honest, funny individuals. And, you know, if you were to do research, sometimes, you know, especially it can just associate certain like a or logical thinking with autism, and that's not always the case. Sometimes it is, but not always. So, you know, taking a strengths-based approach with individuals, maybe they have, you know, great spatial ability, creativity, that attention to detail, the logical thinking, hyper focus. Maybe they're really attuned to social cues. I was talking with a police officer that I used to coach with who had PTSD, and he said his hypervigilance that came from his PTSD is actually quite a strength within the role, um, because he's noticing things that other people aren't, right? Resilience, retaining information, pattern recognition, visual thinking. And within neurodiversity, there's a concept called spiky profiles. And some people have, you know, very pronounced strengths in certain areas and maybe more pronounced challenges in others, pronounced strengths in some, pronounced challenges in others. So for me, I would say my pronounced strengths are more kind of on the people side of things, you know, empathy, big picture thinking, attuned to more social cues, humor. Where my challenges are is definitely attention to detail, sometimes logical thinking, analytical abilities, right? But I you know, work within my challenges a bit more when I'm leaning more into my strengths. So when we're working on, you know, working within neurodiverse teams, biases, check your assumptions. Are you really focusing on someone's deficits that you're missing what their strengths are? Something to be mindful of. So what are some of the benefits of valuing neurodiversity and disability in the workplace? Coming from a recruiting background, it's really hard to find good talent. And it's one thing to attract good talent. It's another thing to want to keep people at your organization, right? So with an industry that experiences a lot of high turnover, being able to open our talent pool to people who are, you know, historically marginalized and underemployed, you know, we're missing out on a lot of great talent and individuals because of our biases and, you know, lack of awareness. Just because someone has challenges in some areas doesn't mean they can't thrive in other areas within the organization. So being able to attract, develop, and empower our talent. I mentioned innovation. So in the food and bev, where there's a lot of need for product development, we want people who think differently, as well as supporting meaningful partnerships with underrepresented groups. You know, I have some clients who actually have neurodiversity peer groups, for example, being able to hear from different voices within the organization or sector. And in turn, that improves retention, our engagement, feelings of psychological safety. These are just obviously a few. Feel free to type in the chat any other benefits that you see in terms of valuing neurodiversity and disability within the workplace. And as I mentioned, when we talk about accessibility, it's really about removing barriers. And a lot of times we think of barriers as just within our built environment, right? So someone who has a wheelchair and they can't go upstairs, they might need a ramp. So those stairs are a barrier. To remove the barrier, we put a ramp in place. But I like to outline other types of barriers within organizations. A barrier is really just any obstacle. What's getting in the way of our desired outcome? So whether it's advancing within an organization, feeling like we belong in the organization, being, you know, a valuable team member, what's getting in the way of that? And oftentimes I see a lot of psychological barriers, either from a leadership perspective or from the individual perspective. So this could be feelings of psychological safety, confidence, our mental well-being, I do a lot of surveys, anonymous engagement surveys, and a lot of times people who, experience disability or neurodivergence in the workplace, they're really fearful of disclosing because they're fearful of either losing their job, not getting promoted, fear of stigma, and all of that time that they're not disclosing, they're not getting the support that they need, right? As well as cultural or social barriers. So these could be norms or values or dynamics that kind of marginalize certain groups. This could be a lot of different things, and I'll outline on another page. But is your culture, your organizational culture, the culture within the sector, first of all, do we have the awareness of neurodiversity? Are we open to making positive change? Are we committed to making positive change? I think that's a big barrier that I see oftentimes. Organizational and business practices. Do we have really rigid processes or systems or policies that unintentionally exclude people? If we do have policies, are people even aware of where to find them? I see that oftentimes. A lot of times managers don't even know the right process to go through in terms of if someone on their team were to disclose that they either were experiencing disability or neurodivergence. They're really not clear on what those next steps are to help that individual get support. Leadership and strategic. Do you have that buy-in? Is it part of your strategy? If you have a DEI strategy, is neurodiversity even mentioned? Oftentimes it's left out of the conversation. Are your leaders aware? Are they, equipped with the right tools to be able to support individuals? Communication breakdown is something I see all the time. So this could be breakdowns in how information is shared and received. Like I said, we all have different preferences in terms of how we communicate. A lot of the communication breakdowns I see are in the heavily text dense documents, rather than, video, or breaking things down a little bit more in plain language, having a little bit more spacing. So actually having accessible documents that are easily to read, or you're able to read with, accessible assistive technology. Our built environment, so physical spaces that exclude or disadvantage employees. Like I said, this could be something as simple as, dimming lights, allowing someone to use noise canceling headphones. Digital and technological, so technology and tools that are not designed inclusively. With the Accessibility Act, we're seeing a lot of changes within, organizations making sure that all their systems, softwares, documents are fully accessible, which is great to see. Interpersonal, so this is more in the day-to-day dynamics with colleagues, managers, or teams. A barrier could be someone experiencing bullying or harassment. Maybe it's aren't overly helpful in the workplace. Maybe it's just that lack of awareness of how to communicate effectively with people on your team. And the economic and structural. So these are more systemic structures, which, unfortunately is something that we see all over the place in the traditional workplace or the traditional education system. So really those systemic barriers are very common. And I gave some examples, but really going through and just thinking about the different types of barriers, whether it's that psychological, interpersonal, how we're interacting with people, or the cultural. Is it something that we access? Maybe we don't see it as a barrier because we don't, lived experience of experiencing it as a barrier. So are we asking the people within our organization or their types of make place, more inclusive? So looking at these barriers, some of the strategies could be just normalizing conversations about, neurodiversity, experiencing disability in the workplace, or say to me, we don't know what we think it's our responsibility to start or raise our awareness. Positive change starts with, raising our awareness. Really valuing the diverse working styles rather than, valuing your style as the best style. Making sure that whether it's adjustments or accommodations or just receiving support, making sure that it's clear for everyone. If you're an individual, do the individuals in your workplace know who to go to when they need support? They're most likely to go to their manager. So do our managers, leaders, do we have that, awareness? Are we aware of our processes? Are we aware of having, respectful conversations? Do we feel confident in being able to support? And if we don't, what maybe training or tools do we need? Providing multiple formats of communication, low sensory environments, really encouraging feedback. What are some barriers you're experiencing and what changes can we make? As well, so that situational variability, this is a very, very simplistic model that helps us take a step back when we don't know. Oftentimes when I'm coaching people and we're talking about, what they might need, so we can kind of take a step back and look at it from the tasks itself. Are you having, difficulties within your role, and why might you? Are you clear on what you need to do? Are the expectations clear? Do you need accessible assistive tech? Is it too complex? Is it too boring? Really get granular. It's our cognitive differences, and we need to, work in a different way. And do we have the freedom to be able to do that? Is it a environment barrier? Am I having sensory sensitivities that impacting my ability to focus and be effective? Maybe I just have a lack of safety with my manager, a lack of trust and respect. And that's all impact because I'm so filled with fear, burnout. So think about the different roles that performs within the sector. How might certain environments, expectations within the sector either enable, create barriers for your colleagues or yourself? And how can greater flexibility in tasks, work environment, or cultural expectations help everyone to do their best work? So I like to say that I'm not a tips and tricks coach. This is not a one size fits all. I really like an individual approach, hearing about the voices within organizations, identifying barriers so we can come up with more effective solutions. Okay, so that's it. We'll save some time for questions. I know it's a big topic to cover in only 50 minutes, so hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you very much, Laura. And we've got a few questions that have come in. So how about I ask them and you can answer them? The first one, how can I support someone on my team if they haven't disclosed a disability or neurodivergence?
I hear managers especially, and great that we individuals, and this is where I would recommend taking a step back. Challenges are so whether and being able, so no matter what the label is, it's more about what are the barriers and the challenges that individual might be having. The level of safety within that individual is important. Neurodivergence disability, or that they're fearful. So if they are fearful to disclose, really building that level of trust and psychological safety can kind of help lead to more effective conversations, which might supports in the future.
Cool. What are some low-cost, effective changes I can make to an environment to be more accessible?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one that I thought. Again, I think it's important to know what team are experiencing. So if it is noise, can noise, if it's a warehouse production line where there's not the noise that's happening, can you provide noise canceling headphones or earbuds? And a lot of organizations do that. If you're not, dim the light, glasses. I've had one concussion, and there wasn't much they could do for the lighting, and they didn't want to allow the individual to wear sunglasses because of optics of how it would look on calls with different clients. So we advertise, is it optics or looking a, and we make changes.
Sorry, Laura, your bandwidth is really low, so we're not
Oh,
seeing very, I mean, you're being very choppy. Are you still sharing your,
bars here.
are you still sharing your presentation or no?
I'm not. No.
Okay, no, that I was just going to say maybe stop because it's eating up your bandwidth. Are we good?
Could you hear me? Could you hear my answer though?
It's kind of choppy back and forth, so maybe you might
Okay,
want to
sorry about that.
go back over that. So how can I support, I mean, what are some low cost effective changes I can make to an environment to be more accessible?
Okay. So some of the things I talked about, whether it's the noise or the lighting or the smells, and reduce the noise where you can. But if you're unable to, for example, if it's in on a production line where you can't do too much about the noise, it's a very noisy environment, allowing people to either wear earbuds or noise canceling headphones to an extent where it's still safe. So maybe it's, but you can still hear people talking to you, for example. If you can't change the lighting, allowing people to either wear tinted glasses, sunglasses, blue light glasses, things like that. So identifying whether you can make the changes or not. And if you can't, what can you add to help with the sensory barriers?
Perfect. Did the COVID-19 pandemic affect how workplace inclusion is looked at? Did it help or hinder for those who are challenged?
Was work from home. So being able to have more control of your environment at home. I think neurodivergent people kind of I don't have to mask all day. I can dim my lights. I can, wear comfier clothes. A lot of things that help with either the social or sensory barriers. I think that was one of the best things that came from COVID and work from home. Some of the other things I hear though is more of that isolation, lack of connection, being able to be more attuned to the people on your team. So being able to know, am I doing a good job because I'm not getting that feedback as often. So I've seen it from both sides, really, some of the positives and some of the challenges.
How can we change our hiring practices, which tend to be streamlined and uniform?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something I work with my clients quite a bit, and is looking at every interaction that a candidate might have throughout the employee journey. So I think a big part of it is gaining feedback from individuals in terms of, what can we do better and what's not working, right? So, you know, yes, to a certain extent, we need streamlined hiring processes because sometimes you're going through of resumes, you have to interview and screen a lot of people. We need ability and some more options within that process. And I think there's a lot of changes we can make with kind of the universal design in terms of accessible, so it benefits everyone. For it's essential, right? People as are using plain language, being very clear about how to request accommodations. A lot of times I see the generic relation, right? Being very clear, who am I reaching out to? What are my options? What does that process look like? Is it going to have an impact on my ability to be hired? So things like that. And I would just say, taking a look at your current process and taking a look with an inclusive eye and hearing from diverse voices on what you can do differently.
We tend to, especially when you're hiring, is always have the same kind of resume, the same kind of questions, the same kind of process all the time. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something that now, if we've got to get our heads around this, we've got to change that and be open to different kinds of people coming in through our doors instead of trying to make them fit into this uniform, like they said, uniform thing all the time. In your experience,
Mm-hmm.
which roles or functions within the food and beverage sector are especially well suited for neurodivergent talent to thrive? That's a good question.
I so individual, um, you know, types of with industry. So really looking at the role and working with that individual to see, like, does this work within your strengths? What are your challenges? Where you have challenges, can we add either adjustments or supports that help with that level of challenge? It's so situational. There's so many options. It really, it's so different. It looks completely different. So I think taking an individualized approach based on, the candidates that you're hiring.
Great. And it looks like we've come to the end of our questions for our answers. So thank you very much, Laura, for a very interesting and informative presentation. For everyone, we will be sending the link of the webinar recording on our FPSC YouTube channel, and as well as a copy of the presentation. So you should get that shortly. And please join us on October 23rd for our next Speaking Food webinar. Thank you again, Laura, and goodbye, everybody.
Everyone.